Get Rich Education is brought to you by Audible. More than 150,000 audiobooks to choose from for your mobile device.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 28. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. With listeners in 114 countries, it's the show where we don't focus on following money, but rather on making money follow you with cash-flowing investments. You don't find this discussion just anywhere because, frankly, the scarcity mentality is abundant and the abundance mentality is scarce. I'm making the investing show that I wish I had a decade ago. Hey, all Get Rich Education episodes can now be found on SoundCloud. We're proud to be one of the first podcasts featured there. They've got a cool interface. We've also got some announcements in future weeks about how you can find GRE on some other platforms where very few shows currently exist. So, thanks so much for being part of the show's growth. You know, if I share investment ideas and information with others, it does nothing to diminish me. Imagine a lit candle with a full flame. If I take my fully lit candle and tilt it in toward your dim candle and light it for you, your candle is going to have a flame as full as mine, and doing that for you didn't diminish my candle's flame one bit, and now there are two lit candles. Then you can go share your flame with someone else or just shine it on them and give them light. So, I'm happy to share a turnkey cash-flowing real estate investment with you today. You know, humans have inhabited land in dwellings, which today we refer to as improved real estate, for thousands of years. But an even earlier and more enduring human use of that land is for the purpose of agriculture. Now, with residential income properties' persistent mantra of location, 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 well, before you buy, a prudent investor first needs to look for sustainable population growth and job drivers and some other things in that particular location, in that local market, because you serve that renter for housing that customer in just that local market. With agricultural land, cash-flowing crops are grown in one local market, but your customer is the whole world. It's no longer serving just that one local market. Just like there's sustainable demand for housing in the right market, there has been sustainable demand for agriculture for thousands of years. It was that famed ecologist Alan Savory that said, ultimately, the only wealth that can sustain any community, economy, or nation is derived from the photosynthetic process, green plants growing on regenerating soil. I hope I got that quote word for word correct. But, you know, when it comes to coffee, is it really a human caloric need? I don't know, but I know that it has sustainable demand. I mean, coffee's consumption is sort of deeply ingrained in American, Canadian culture, and most likely yours, whatever country you're listening from. Even during the depths of the U.S. Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, you would get off the airplane at the airport and the longest lines were at Starbucks, wrapping around out of the food court and out into the hallway, just like you see today. From globally renowned economists like Jim Rogers telling us on TV and in his books to invest in agricultural land, you've got Simon Black of Sovereign Man doing exactly that in Chile. Porter Stansberry recently saying that he's personally buying corn farms. I mean, many of the smartest, most globally savvy commentators and authors are investing in agriculture, and it's often outside the United States. Now, you've also got renowned global economists like Peter Schiff and Richard Duncan, whom was the first guest that ever appeared here on Get Rich Education. Well, they've been sounding warning bells about profligate U.S. monetary policy and very real threats of recession, or far worse, here in the U.S. Now, I probably tend to be more optimistic than most of those people, but most every big macroeconomic brain out there has well-founded reasoning such that I think it's vital to at least have some international diversification in hard assets. So, either way, there are only more mouths to feed in this world as the population grows, and yet at the same time, the amount of arable land is decreasing. Here in the United States, the food production industry is so highly regulated, mostly by the USDA and the EPA, sometimes for good and sometimes to excess. That farmers often cannot be profitable with regulation on top of regulation. So if you look south of the United States, higher end specialty coffee has had an industry growth rate substantially faster than most any crop and faster than lesser grades of coffee for sure. Now, a few years ago, through mutual friends, I became familiar with David Sewell, the founder of International Coffee Farms, who provides turnkey coffee farm investing opportunities in Panama directly to individual investors like us. I've since gotten to know David and his affable sales manager, Darren Doyle. In fact, my wife and I have had dinner with David and Darren, just the four of us, to get to know each other better last year. David's had the privilege of presenting their investment in a formal setting last year at the world's most prestigious investment conference in New Orleans, where I was in the audience. I've watched David present in person elsewhere. I hung out with David 2 months ago at a big real estate seminar in Las Vegas. So David has been very available and visible at real estate events representing international coffee farms. I've got a number of investor friends that invest with them, and in full disclosure, I am an investor in this instrument myself. The opportunity cost of not being involved with this was too great for me. I bought in last year, and I'm glad that I did. There are now about 700 half-acre farm parcels owned by their hundreds of investors. It's an investment where you own the actual real estate. It's a hard asset investment. It's not a fund. You're leveraging other people's time and other people's expertise with good returns that start slow and then ramp up over time as the coffee crops mature. David has lived in Panama for 8 years. You're going to learn about how you can get in on this. You're going to meet the international man, David Sewell, next. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Get Rich Education listeners, how would you like the latest audiobook from Robert Kiyosaki, the #1 personal financial author of all time, for free? For my listeners, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You can pick out any audiobook that you want. My pick is you really ought to read Robert Kiyosaki's new book, Second Chance, For Your Money and Your Life. It uses the lessons from the past and a brutal assessment of the present to prepare listeners to see and seize the future. Get yours now at audibletrial.com/getricheducation.
This is Rich Dad Advisor Garrett Sutton. To grow your wealth, listen to the always valuable Get Rich Education.
Joining us from David City, Panama today, I'd like to bring in the founder and managing director of International Coffee Farms. Welcome to Get Rich Education, David Sewell.
Hi, Keith. Thanks very much for having me today. How's life in Anchorage?
Hey, it's great. I made it through another winter somehow. In a climate very different from what Anchorage has, why don't you tell us about how you came to be where you are today, David? What's your offshore story?
Well, it goes back quite a ways. 1989, really, when I left Canada. I was born in Canada in the great frozen white north in the prairies in Saskatchewan, which is probably colder than Anchorage most of the time. Went through college there, joined the Navy, and moved to Victoria, British Columbia, and served for 12 years as an officer in the Royal Canadian Navy. The last 2 years of that, I stayed in the reserves, earned an MBA, went off to work in the corporate world in the 80s, realizing as I was going further down the line, the corporate ladder, that it wasn't really for me, that I was busy making other people rich, and I really thought I should be concentrating more on myself, selfishly a bit maybe, but my family and myself, and doing what I was doing for others for myself. So come 89, I decided to move to the first tax haven that I ever moved to, which is oddly enough the United States of America. For anybody that's not an American, generally the U.S. is a pretty solid tax haven. And when I was paying a 52% marginal tax rate in Canada in 1989,
wow,
plus goods and services taxes and sales taxes and every other tax they could possibly create to generate enough income to provide me free health care, I decided that was not for me. Moving off to Southern California, which in those days was a great place to live. My tax rate dropped to like 34%. So it was almost like an offshore tax haven. And it's right in the good old USA in California. No longer the situation, of course. Over the period of time I was there, I moved into Mexico and took a small place on the beach in Mexico, realized I loved the Latin American people and the culture and the style and nature of life there. But I didn't like the fact that there was no rule of law in Mexico, and there really still isn't, in my opinion. So I kept my place there, and I vacationed there, and I went back for 2 and 3 months at a time and lived on the Gulf of California and enjoyed myself, but couldn't invest and couldn't conduct business from that country. It just wasn't safe, in my opinion, and in a legal fashion. Moved to Costa Rica, lived there for 4 years or so, and was successful in doing a real estate development. Much better place to live and work from back in the 90s. But Costa Rica, again, had a great grasp on things for internationalizing assets and people, and a great pensionado program for retirees. But they forgot to continue on with the skills and abilities that got them where they were. And the country continued to decline, in my opinion, with respect to infrastructure and services and internet and how to do business from there, and the taxes were higher and things like that. So I decided to move on and see what else I could find internationally. Went to Argentina and very much enjoyed myself in Argentina. Buenos Aires is a wonderful place to be. The Paris of South America, fantastic place. Kind of a messed up country when it comes to economics and finance and currency and things like that. Probably not the greatest place to do business from, but I realized they'd overcorrected and they have snow. And so that wasn't going to work.
Too far south.
Too far south. Yeah, that wasn't going to work, and quite a long ways away from home and family and things like that. Came back to the United States, did a little tour in Florida, helping a friend start up an internet company. And then finally, in the middle of the 2000s, made my great escape to Panama, which I had done a lot of homework investigating while I lived in Costa Rica, and through subsequent trips down here in the 2000s, after the canal was given back to the Panamanians from the Americans, and the economy recovered from that change. And since the middle 2000s, it's been a phenomenal place to live with a rapidly growing economy, and it's a great halfway house for North Americans who want to expatriate into a Latin American culture, but are a little bit afraid of taking it the full step. So Panama is a great place to be. And we've been here ever since 2007.
Prior to getting into the business of coffee farms in Panama and offering titled coffee farms to individual real estate investors, you did this in Colombia, and you've got some proof of concept there.
We started it in Colombia in 2012. Offering half-acre parcels of titled property, turnkey managed, to investors in developing coffee farms in Colombia. And it was very well accepted. Since that time, we've, in combination with Colombia and Panama, placed about 200 individual coffee farm parcel owners, or investors, into about 700 coffee farm parcels, half-acre coffee farm parcels, both in Colombia and here in Panama. And the business model that we use in Panama is virtually the same as the one in Colombia. The Colombian one was successful. The farms were bought and sold out. The distributions have been made, and the company is progressing along its plan, proving the concept. All we had to do was tweak it a little bit here in Panama to reflect the realities of the business world here. Not too consequential changes, a single harvest annually here as opposed to 2 harvests in Colombia and things like that. But substantially, same business model, proven with about $7 million worth of coffee farm parcels in the hands of about 200 investors to date.
I think a lot of people don't realize coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world to oil, so it is quite a robust business. Is it a need? I don't know, but is there always demand for it? Yes, there is. So, and what you do is you add value to existing coffee farms, or you take parcels where there's just vacant land and you convert it into specialty coffee farms. So what is sort of the difference between existing commercial coffee farms and specialty coffee?
Well, there's a lot of difference. The vast majority of the coffee business worldwide, which is a 90 billion with a B industry, 40 billion alone in the US, large part of that is commercial coffee. Coffee grown and sold in large lots, generally to one buyer, like Nestle's or Folgers or Procter & Gamble or whoever makes coffee at those higher levels from farms all around the world. They buy bulk coffee that has not been processed to be zero defect coffee, but is standard, ordinary commercial coffee that you see traded on the what they call the C market in New York, the Mercantile Exchange and places like this in the commodities exchange markets. And you can see that number crawling across the bottom of the screen on CNBC or Bloomberg or whomever. That's commercial coffee. It's a commodity product subject to the variations in price and demand that supply and demand create. The other side of the coin is taking those farms that are in history commercial producing coffee farms and turning them around into a specialty coffee farm. In other words, babysitting the coffee trees, who are our tenants in the real estate language, to produce coffee that is of much higher quality than the commercial variety through the application of capital and coffee science generally and time. You can take commercial coffee trees and make them produce a higher quality coffee cherry and a higher quality coffee bean, which then you can then produce into specialty coffee. So specialty coffee is not just grown, but it's also made. In other words, you take that cherry from the tree, process it differently, babysit it carefully, produce zero defect coffee, and that's the high quality stuff that you're buying in the stores nowadays that are $14, $16, $18, $20, $30, $40, $50, $80 a pound, depending what you're buying. That's specialty coffee, and it's ranked and associated with a set of guidelines that prove the quality. So that's the difference in the two.
Okay, so commercial coffee being more of the cheap bulk stuff that you might buy in a big can that's already ground versus specialty coffee that's in a bag and might be individually sourced and traced right to where that individual farm or region is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, before I invested with you, I wasn't aware of the SCAA point system. Is that what helps make the distinction between commercial and specialty coffee?
Absolutely. SCAA, the Specialty Coffee Association of America, has developed a set of guidelines along the same lines as Wine Spectator did 15 years ago for wine, where now you can go into a store and you can see bottles of fairly expensive wine on display, and they'll have a number on the label, and you can tell what the grading level is. You can tell the traceability of the grapes and the producer. Coffee's producing going along the same fashion as wine did, and that's the Specialty Coffee Association has a very, very stringent set of guidelines that are necessary to be followed to grade the coffee and assign it a certain point level. Points are from 0 to 100, but only specialty coffee is only 80 to 100 and up. 86 or 87 is probably in the top 3% of the coffees in the world. And I think I recall that somebody told me that the highest point grade that's ever been applied to a batch of coffee is 92.5 out of that 100. So that way you can rank various coffees by their guidelines that come from the SCAA.
So you have been successfully locating parcels for individual investors in Colombia and now in Panama. And, part of what we've talked about on Get Rich Education is, a lot of time your team is more important than your property. So how do you go about finding managers for your farms? I mean, I would have zero idea about how to go about and do that. So how do you find those people?
Well, part of the secret sauce behind international coffee farms and this business model is just doing that. I mean, frankly, individual investors could come to Panama or Colombia or anywhere else and find a realtor and probably buy a coffee farm. I would suggest that would be a mistake and a big one, but it could be done. But part of the value added to the whole process is not only being able to source the correct farm, to be able to acquire that farm under the proper terms and conditions, to be able to finance that farm appropriately, then it is to make your team and then apply that team to the farm. The art of coffee is exactly that. We call it developing the art of coffee science. So we're putting the science together with the art of developing coffee, and that is something that doesn't come easily and doesn't come quickly. You can't really learn it in school and then come here and run a farm because you've learned it in school. And recently we acquired a farm that had been operated under some of those conditions, and it wasn't quite as successful as it could have otherwise been with someone who has a long time ability at understanding the area you're in, the nature, the soil, the climatic conditions, the working conditions, how the people themselves, the native Indian farmers, how they work and how they farm and how to motivate and how to train them. So there's a lot of inputs that are not thought of beyond simply the finance and acquisition of a farm or even the subdividing and titling of a farm that make it successful. And we fortunately have two top-notch people in our general manager, whose name is Andres Lopez and has been born, raised, and living in the Boquete area all his life and has been working coffee for 30 plus years and is extremely gifted in a wide range of knowledge, not just specifically the growing of the coffee, but everything from the processing and milling of the coffee through the management of the farm to the roasting of the coffee and ultimately to the selling of the coffee from end to end. He's assisted by a gentleman who does not have all of that well-rounded nature that Andres brings to the table, but he is a graduate agronomist. He's a graduate engineer, an agricultural engineer, and he's an agronomist, full-blown agronomist, and he's on our team. And it's extremely important to have him on the team as well, because what we're doing is taking historically not so well-managed farms that didn't have education, coffee science applied to the soil and to the growing of the product and to the management of the trees. And we're taking that into the 21st century with an agronomist and a very educated general manager who can day to day apply the techniques that are necessary. And it's not to be limited, and it's not to be taken lightly. Those techniques are learned over many, many, many years and applied carefully to successful farms.
And part of what they do is they apply that expertise in that knowledge to the farm hands, right? They even need to go as far as pick the coffee in a certain way.
Absolutely. Coffee from the worst end of the scale, coffee in Brazil is machine farmed, whereas a machine will come down the rows between the coffee trees, reach out with a big mechanical arm and strip everything off the branch. I mean, dead cherries, unripe cherries, ripe cherries, all the flowers and everything else that would produce coffee next year, and dump it into a big old bucket. And then that tree can't produce coffee off that branch next year because it's been denuded of everything it needed. So it's a 2-year cycle. Totally different business than we're in, to coming to a coffee tree and standing in front of it and picking by hand, one cherry at a time, the ripe cherries that are ripe on the top where the sun's shining and on the bottom, and various other criteria to picking only the right cherry, not damaging anything on the branch, not knocking off a flower that is soon to be the next cherry 3 weeks down the road or anything else. So it is a very hand-managed, hand-picked process that is part of that making of specialty coffee. And consequently, we have to teach the native Panamanian Indians and the Colombian farmers as well how to do that. And it's not built into their DNA. So we have to change the pricing structure on how they get paid by the pound of cherries they pick, because they're going to pick less, and they make their income off picking certain quantities, and they get paid by the quantity. So we have to adjust many things, and then we have to train them how to do that and make sure that it is understood by them so that they're valuable people to how we want to process coffee.
So that value-added coffee science trickles right down to the individual farmhand, and then they have an incentive to want to go ahead and produce more because it is tied to their wages. And, what I learned about the investment in addition to that is we're able to offer them medical and retirement benefits for the first time, things that these farmhands have usually never had previously.
Correct. What I would call abysmal conditions that they live in and have been left to live in by some of their own people who owned the farms before us. And we have a definite plan to turn that around. We're now in the process of helping our senior farmhands, teenage son who's in high school, the same way. He's already in school, and they all understand the benefit of that, but there are needs. There are clothing needs and books needs and supply needs that even the teenagers don't have access to, so we can supply that. We do that by taking a 20% cut of the farm's net operating profits, and we put that into a socially sustainable bonus pool. And that bonus pool is there purely for the benefit of the people who generate the income from the farms. And that does include the general manager and the farm foreman, the agronomist, and all of the farm hands and the people who put their daily sweat, blood, and tears into producing the coffee that all of us investors are going to make our profits from. So we have that socially sustainable pool set to the side, inviolate, and is to be used solely for those purposes. And we're busy right now in a farm we acquired in January in rehabbing the entire building they live in, down to the basics of spraying to get out the red ants and the scorpions and the insects, and painting things and refurbishing the kitchen. Simple things, but things they wouldn't do for themselves that we are privileged to be able to do. And that's why the team of us, investors, principals of the company, founders, managers, those of us who do the work here, combined with you investors, are the people that are being able to come together to help these people live a lot better lives.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed getting the regular email updates from you about your acquisitions, the crop growth, the harvest, the returns, and getting those stories and the pictures about how you're improving the farmers and their families' lives really humanizes it, and it makes an investor feel good about what they're doing. So from the investor perspective, how does the investor get in? How does the investor participate?
What we do is when we acquire the farms, the plan is to subdivide those farms into individual half-acre parcels, or 2,000 square meters in the lingo of the land here, half an acre parcel. Each of those half-acre parcels is available to an investor, depending on the farm. If it's a producing farm that we're going to turn around, those parcels are $15,000 each. If it is a to-be planted farm, raw land that we're going to create a brand new coffee farm from, the individual investor can acquire 1/2 an acre parcel for $13,000. We'll subdivide those farms into individual parcels and provide the ownership documentation to each individual owner. Once we jump through all the hoops and the legal processes of doing that here in the country, federally, and then provincially in the province of Chiriquí, where we have the farms, and then municipality of Boquete. So there's more value added there to be jumping through all those various hoops. The people from there, we will operate those farms on a turnkey basis. There's no fee for the turnkey management. We participate at the bottom line along with the investors, so we have all of the same interests at heart as everybody else. Once we operate the farm, take away our bonus pool, our socially sustainable pool out of that, pay the expenses, then it's split 80% to the investors from the net and 20% to us. And that 80% of the net is forecast at the moment to generate an average annual yield of somewhere in the range of 13% to 15% a year based on a slice of time. Doesn't happen in the first week or first year because it takes time to either plant a farm or turn a farm around. But as we do those things, cash flow starts, cash flow continues to build quickly and turns into some very, very high numbers, double-digit numbers annually as we get a little longer in the tooth.
Yeah, I know your pro forma in those later years, over a 20-year time horizon, shows a 30 to 40% internal rate of return down the road after the crops have been developed and producing for a while.
Yeah, it produces 30 to 40% plus cash on an annual basis for sure. And those numbers, discounted at a fairly conservative discount rate of 10%, will produce an IRR of somewhere in the 13 to 15%. When you get down the road and you're into the farms and it's turned around or producing and our coffee science is taking effect and our marketing philosophies are taking effect, you're going to see some very high double-digit numbers for sure.
Yeah, I just really like that the turnkey management is already built in. Unlike me buying turnkey real estate properties in various markets in the U.S., there's still a bit of a management component and there's a management fee on top of that. But once one buys in at either $15,000 per turnaround parcel or $13,000 for a to-be planted parcel, the management is all built in, and I find that really attractive. And then additionally, even though we as investors have our own individual parcels, everyone's parcels are managed together as far as pooling the revenues. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, we want to eliminate as many risks as we can. There's no such thing as a no-risk investment, but we can take away financial and business risk by various strategies. And the financial risk is taken away, and in this case, by just exactly what you said. First off, we do not charge a management fee of any sort. Turnkey manage the property. We're in the game for our share of the profits with everybody else. What is done is that to mitigate the financial risk is that we pool the revenues and we pool the expenses across an entire farm. So it really doesn't matter to the individual owner whether his half-acre parcel is here or there or over there. As long as it's on that farm, we pool the revenues together and we pool the expenses together, and then we average that out, and you have your return based on your individual proportional ownership of that farm.
So we have a harvest seasonally. There's one harvest. So I would imagine for an investment like we often see for this type of investment, there is just that one annual cash flow payout. What time of year does that usually occur?
It varies depending on the farm. And that varies depending on the elevation. Crops are ready to harvest different elevations at different times. For example, the farm we acquired in January is at a lower elevation of around 1,100 meters or 3,300 feet, and its crop is harvested October, November, December. So once we finish harvesting that crop, we would rest the coffee, which is something we do to improve the quality and the price and the value of the coffee. From that point in time, it's then sold through a bidding process on micro lots generally. And then from the time we're paid, that process usually takes another quarter. So the lower elevation farms harvest in the late fall, and the cash distributions will be in the spring. The higher elevation farms are a little later, and those harvests are January, February, and March here. So you can just add another 3 months behind that to do the same processes of resting, selling, and getting paid for the coffee. And then the distributions from that farm would be in the late summer, early fall. And then they would be continuously annually at the same time.
All right, so we've got cash flow payments in perpetuity. And then with the improvements that you're making, the income scales up over time, starting off slowly with higher returns later. And then down the road, what does the resale ability look like for an investor if an investor needs to get out and sell?
Well, if you need to get out and sell, there's a first right of refusal to us, which we ask you to offer us, and it's highly likely that we'll take the parcel back from you, although it's not a guarantee, but it is highly likely. You are required to hold the parcels for the first 3 years. It takes time to turn around the farms, and we don't want to encourage anybody that's into the process of what we call a farm flipper. So 3 years into the process, and almost jokingly but not really, we'd probably want to subject you to a psychiatric test of some sort down the road, because I'm not sure why, if you got a property cash flowing with double digits every year in a commodity that's in short supply and high demand like coffee, that you'd ever want to sell. But you can if you want to.
Yeah, you know what I can tell you now, David, and I'm telling my listeners this at the same time? The parcels that I own there with you in Panama, it is the only real estate I own in my portfolio currently that I will never sell. So that tells you what I think about it. So No need for a psychiatric evaluation for me, I suppose. You hold farm tours for investors or even those that might be just interested in checking it out and investing. And what about those?
We did in Colombia, and we will continue to do so in Panama. We have are only at the moment holding individual tours for people who want to come or who are already in Panama for other reasons. And a lot of people are using Panama as a place to create a friendly nations visa and a permanent residency visa here with the mind to having a second passport. And they're coming here on their independently to do that. Also interested in acquiring parcels in the coffee farm, so they come to visit us. And so far, this month, we've had 3 separate groups each weekend on their own coming here to kick the trees, as we like to call it, to just see what we're doing here. We'll continue to do that anytime. Just get a hold of us, and we'll make arrangements to host you here once you're in the country, et cetera, et cetera. We will have group tours as well. The first one will be in the fall, hasn't been determined as to when it will be yet, and we'll host a small group of people, 10, 12, 15, 18, 20 people at a time, have some fun over the weekend, look at the farms, talk about offshoring and banking and residency visas and things like that are of interest to people, should they be of interest, and just have a good time. So pro forma, we'll be looking forward to doing something like that in the fall of this year.
All right, and David is going to let me know later on this year when they have planned that farm tour for this fall, and I can let everyone know, listeners, that if you come on that tour, you will meet your Get Rich Education host there. Yes, I plan to be on the tour, and I can't think of anything more fun than checking out my own farms with some investors that I've helped let know about the investment, and maybe even drinking coffee from our own farm while we're checking these places out. So speaking to that, I mean, David, what are kind of the types of people that invest in these farms? I know you told me about 30% of the people use IRA money. What's the typical investor profile? Is there one?
Not really. We purposely structured the business model so that the entry point was low, so that individual people who may or may not have much experience in investing, period, or outside of the stock markets that are traditional investments in paper assets, can experience a way to own real estate without a large capital investment. They can get their feet wet in an offshore situation where they're going to do something outside the country, possibly for the first time. And numerous people are first-time investors outside of the country, and some are even investors outside of the state or even their own county, and are moving offshore for a variety of reasons. So the profile varies from the not-so-sophisticated investor and has a low entry point to the average owner who owns somewhere between 3 and 4 parcels, so may invest in the order of $40,000 or $50,000 to get started, to some people who are significantly more experienced in what we're doing, have multiple investments internationally, travel extensively, and may have a dozen or 15 or 20 parcels at one time. So it varies all the way across the board, but very importantly, at least 30%, and maybe even a higher number than that now, are discovering that using your traditional or your Roth or your SEP IRAs or a 401k where you no longer work for the employer can free up those funds into other alternative asset classes, not just offshore investing in coffee farms, but lots of other things can be done with those IRAs. Once you structure them properly to be self-directed and follow the rules, which are not very onerous. It's quite easy to set up, quite inexpensive to do, will certainly supercharge your IRA when it comes to your returns on your investment inside that IRA. And it's a great way to own international offshore assets, including a little small half-acre parcel of a coffee farm.
I kind of think of it as agricultural real estate investing and international real estate investing with training wheels on, turnkey, done for you, and achieving both of those things at the same time. So I love it. I'm really passionate about this particular investment that I've made myself, and I think it actually gets a little bit better. David, do you want to tell my audience about the generous offer that you've made just for Get Rich Education listeners?
Certainly. My pleasure. Keith, you've been involved with us for quite some length of time, and you know who we are and how we operate and what our foibles are and how we do things. And we're very appreciative of you presenting this opportunity to other Get Rich Education listeners. which I understand are growing logarithmically, and congratulations to you for that. We'd like to have other Get Rich Education listeners involved with the coffee farms here in Panama, and we can offer a $12,000 per half acre parcel price just for Get Rich Education listeners versus the $13,000 retail price for a to-be planted farm. So would be $12,000 just for your people alone, and I'm sure you can tell them how to contact you and or us to take advantage of that offer.
Yes, in order to do that, send an email to coffee@getricheducation.com with your name and email address, and you will be registered. So thank you, David. That is an extremely generous offer you've made for my listeners. In fact, I think they're getting a better deal than when I bought my coffee farm parcels last year, and I absolutely love that. So appreciate you doing that. David Sewell, thanks so much for coming on to Get Rich Education today. This is an investment that's so fun to talk about.
Thanks so much, Keith. I appreciate the time.
I hope you enjoyed that. This is really one of the most anticipated shows that I've brought you for quite a while because it is actionable content that can really help change the trajectory of your life. To participate, you don't need to be an accredited investor. It's open to anybody, and that's exactly congruent with my mission in what I bring you on this show. So you're likely not going to get a loan for this type of investment. On the bright side, you don't need any particular credit score, any liquid reserves, or meet any sort of debt-to-income ratio requirement. Hey, so just a reminder, this is ideas and information. Please listen to the disclaimer at the end of the show. I can tell you that as long as I've been following this investment, the prices for parcels only increase, and it is a real asset, so there are just only so many available. I saw the prices begin at $10,000 when they were selling the parcels in Colombia 3 years ago. When you send your name and email address to coffee@getricheducation.com to register for your $1,000 discount on each parcel for those to-be-planted farms, from 13K down to 12K, International Coffee Farms will be in touch with you from there. That email address is in the show notes. We've had some providers give listeners nice discounts before, but I think this is the most generous thing that a guest has ever done for Get Rich Education listeners. You and a friend could pool your funds together and share one of the half-acre parcels. Someone else might be interested in buying 10 parcels for $120K. Either way, you will be an international agricultural real estate investor. Wow, that really jumps off the resume. So, hey, well, your future depends on what you do today, and the difference between believing and knowing is doing. So, keep investing in yourself. The only thing certain about your future is you. Now go out there and don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to the Get Rich Education podcast, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.